Afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. Folks getting food, no problem. Please fill up and come sit down. It's nice to see everybody. We're bringing some more extra chairs over by the bathroom, so if you don't see a seat, just grab a chair and pull one up to the table. It's great to see everybody. I'm Mariam Hamadani, Associate Director of CCSRE, and we'd like to give a special welcome to all of you, but also to the AAAS Real Talk class. So we're combining our groups today. We're co-sponsoring the event with African and African American Studies, so I just want to thank Cheryl and Sammy for partnering with us on today's event. Now, before I turn it over to Sammy Aleem, Director of AAAS and Professor of Education, who's going to introduce our speaker today, I just want to give a couple quick event reminders. We know there's a lot going on campus, but here are a couple to catch if you can. Tonight at 5:30, our undergrad program is putting on a co-sponsored event with Islamic Studies in the McCoy Center for Ethics and Society on academic freedom in the context of the Israel-Palestine conflict. So that's going to take place in the CSAC conference room, which is in Encina Hall Central. And please join us if you can for this timely discussion. We know there's a lot going on campus and a lot to talk about. So if you can make it, please come out. And then tomorrow, the Anderson Collection and Theater and Performance Studies, along with a number of co-sponsors on campus, we're one of them, also AAAS, is bringing poet, essayist, and playwright and professor Elizabeth Alexander to campus. Now, you may know her from President Obama's 2009 inauguration. She composed and delivered the inaugural poem, Song of the Day. And so she's going to come and talk about ancestry and African American arts, and she also has a new book coming out in the spring, so if you can make it to that promises to be a special event, and it's going to take place at the Denning Family Resources Center, which is located at the Anderson Collection. And finally, we hope you can join us on March 12th for our final RICS seminar of winter quarter. We have Professor Petronila Gonçalves de Silva from the Federal University in São Carlos in Brazil. She's also a Tinker visiting professor here this year and teaching a course, winter quarter. And she's affiliated with the Center for Latin American Studies. And she's going to be speaking about the Brazilian experiences in implementing affirmative action policies in higher education. So we hope you can join us. This will be a great comparative talk. And it's been a pleasure to have her join us this year. So now let me turn it over to Sammy, who will introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Miriam. It's great to see everybody here and everybody enjoying some good food as we get started. Especially great to see Real Talk. Where are you, Real Talk? There you are. Thank you. Good to see everybody. And great to be collaborating as African and African American Studies with CCSRE again on a faculty seminar series. So again, welcome. I'd like to introduce to you a bit formally our speaker for today, although informally, I'll say that I've had the chance to hear Dr. Fox Harrell speak a number of times on campus, and each time I'm just amazed and stimulated by the combination of things that he brings together, from communications to computer science, to race and ethnic studies, to race and gender, et cetera, and he brings them all together in this framework of cultural computing, which I find incredibly fascinating, and I'm sure we'll get to hear more about today. I also want to say, for students who are here, that Dr. Harrell's work represents what I think is the future and cutting edge of these areas. And for many of our students who are coming in CCSRE, AAAS, we're thinking about race and ethnic studies, but we're also thinking about computational science and technology, et cetera, and bringing those things together. I know many of you have asked those sorts of questions, and so I think this conversation will touch this room on multiple levels. So I'm incredibly excited. That said, Dr. Fox Harrell is Associate Professor of Digital Media in the Comparative Media Studies program and the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at MIT. He founded and directs the MIT Imagination, Computation, and Expression Laboratory, the ICE Lab, because it's that cold, right, Fox? Harrell holds a PhD in computer science and cognitive science from UCSD. In 2010, he received the National Science Foundation Career Award for his project Computing for Advanced Identity Representation, And if you haven't seen his most recent book, or his recent book in 2013 by MIT Press, it's called Phantasmal Media, An Approach to Imagination, Computation, and Expression. Right now, he is 2014-2015 fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. We're so happy to have him discuss his research on the use of the computer for creative expression, cultural analysis, and social empowerment. And I will leave it there. Let's give Dr. Fox-Harrell a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the gracious introduction, and thanks to CCSRE, AAAS for having me here, and also for you for coming today. Yeah, so today I'll be talking about some of my work in computational narrative, that's interactive narrative for empowerment and expression. So as was mentioned, I run the Imagination, Computation, and Expression Laboratory at MIT. This is an interdisciplinary lab. It's the first lab that's joint between computer science and artificial intelligence labs. So my PhD students are electrical engineering and computer science students. I have master's students from the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. These are comparative media studies students, all coming together to build AI and cognitive science-based systems for creative expression, cultural analysis, and social empowerment. And so today, this is what I'll do. So I'll tell you a little bit about my own personal research trajectory, about the core concepts in my book, Phantasmal Media, briefly, just as an evocative introduction to focusing on 3 interactive narrative systems that I built. These are platforms for building particular works. One is called Griot, another one's called Genie, which I'll tell you what the acronym stands for later, and the final one is called Chymera, before I wrap up today. So first I'll begin just with a brief personal research history. And so today I'll be focusing primarily on my work in interactive narrative. So this is in a way a return to some of my research origins. So as was mentioned, recently I've been working on this NSF grant, which is Computing for Advanced Identity Representation, imaginative ways that we construct ourselves in digital media, avatars, profiles, virtual world characters, and the way that these can all combine and tell us something different about ourselves. But the beginning of this work was thinking about narrative. Narrative is fundamental to human thought, narrative forms of expression. And my foundation was initially in computer science and digital media arts. So what I've tried to do at each stage in my career is just to go as rigorously into each area as I could. Starting back from my time as an undergraduate, I pursued a Bachelor's of Science in Logic and Computation at the same time as my Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Art, focusing on digital media art, and a minor in computer science. And so I was bridging between these areas of mathematics as well as computer science and art. And from there went on to a terminal master's degree that was more focused on digital media arts. Not really terminal as much as it was described in the degree program, because I went on to a PhD program after that in computer science and engineering. But at that time, I started to begin to notice a gap on either side of me. So on the artificial intelligence side, as well as on the media studies side. And so I'll begin to tell you a little bit about this gap that I noticed on each side and the way I began to bridge it. So on the artificial intelligence side, when I started, people are interested in topics such as virtual reality. So that was it's coming back now with Oculus, but this was at the time. You can see this is 90s this is VRML, virtual reality markup language, which was hot for about a minute at that time. Really the bandwidth wasn't there, the technology wasn't developed enough, but people are interested in this idea of immersing yourself in a kind of virtual world, head-mounted display, and so forth. But also people are interested in topics like believable agents or behavioral animation. And so this is this kind of AI approach where you have these characters where you can control them, but they also can sort of do some things on their own. So they're AI characters that you go up to another character, tell it you want some food, and it doesn't want to give it to you, and it acts with attitude in some kind of way and becomes angry at you. And so it's a combination of user control and artificial intelligence. So this is people like Perlin and Goldberg at NYU, Joe Bates and the Oz Project at Carnegie Mellon University, Bruce Blumberg at MIT, and others. And so in short, you can think that the Holy Grail at this time was a version toward a vision of the holodeck. Right? People were, so this book came out also in the late 90s, Hamlet on the Holodeck. about this idea of interactive narrative in cyberspace. And really, it was this idea that you have this virtual playground, so the holodeck being this metaphor coming from Star Trek here, where you can go into this world, you have this grid behind you, and you can project this imaginative world that you're immersed within. And you can be whoever you want to be when you're within that imaginative world, and do whatever you want to do, although really at that time, that really just meant interacting with objects and acquiring objects. But the aim was that then you could also be immersed in a story, and no matter what you do, you still get a kind of coherent story like Sherlock Holmes stories. But this kind of researchers, as undergrad, and I began asking about this kind of research, were seldom interested in topics like interactivity to engage diverse cultural perspectives, as opposed to this kind of interactive playground that you can explore. Diverse cultural models of narrative. Not every narrative is a tight narrative with a tidy closure at the end. So Gerald Visner, for example, in Native American studies, described trickster stories that don't have that kind of tight, coherent causal trajectory and ending and wrap up. Rather, they're about the tricky play of sort of rulership and power. And that's the final topic. What about issues of equity and power? What about stories for social engagement and social issues? And so these are not typically seen as sort of the subject matter of computer science and artificial intelligence. And on the digital media side, scholars were interested in topics at that time like virtual body image. So there was a lot of critique of this sort of thing, like the body image of Laura Croft, usually a kind of semiotic critique, and issues of gender inequity that were important. Then there were a lot of discussion of new types of communities, so text-based virtual communities. MUDs and MOOs, so the precursors to these massively multiplayer online games that you have now, Lambda Moo being one where people interacted as animals, go there, you could type in whatever description you want and build new rooms, explore and interact with other people. So there's this idea of these virtual communities and new configurations and issues that echoed the sort of issues we saw in previous media like body image. But there was seldom interest in issues like how the cultural aspects emerge from the software level, from the code level, from the engineering side of the work. There wasn't as much concern on this side for developing new types of systems and new types of design. And finally, the role of knowledge engineering, so in AI being the term for how we implement dynamic representations of meaning that you engage with, the back-end data structures of these systems. And so I saw these kind of gaps on the cultural side, missing the kind of engineering component, and on the other side, the kind of issues that I really felt most passionately about myself. And so what I really sought to do with computational narrative was generating and varying types of figurative meaning. And so what I mean is that your interaction should drive new types of metaphor. So you could imagine, because people always say interactive narrative, oh, you mean choose your own adventure? Right, that's sort of the most simple form of interactive narrative. That's just you have a plot point, and then you have two different options, and those change the plot. But what if the plot could be fixed, but you could have different metaphors to tell the story each time? You could have different emotional tone, tell the same story with a melancholy tone or an inspiring tone, and so forth. And what about bringing in cross-cultural imagery or diverse cultural models within the system? And so the idea for me was to enable users to algorithmically tell stories with multiple themes each time, and also engage society in a critical kind of way. And a good example of this would be the classic film Rashomon. So how many people have seen the film Rashomon? Right, so just a couple of people here. So this is a classic Akira Kurosawa film. And so it tells the same story of a brutal crime. This is a story of a tragic rape and murder in Japan. And each time that the story is told, it's from a different point of view. And in fact, none of the points of view are compatible. So when you watch all four of these, one after another, in the end, there's this emergent message, which is, where is truth? Where is meaning in life? And so this broader kind of message comes up because, not because of any of the individual stories, but the contrast between the stories. And in that case, they're very well orchestrated to bring this issue out. But could you have a system that can do the same sort of thing, where by playing through it multiple times and multiple experiences, there's meaningful difference that a broader message emerges? So that's the sort of thing I was interested in. When I talked to the professors, they said, but why wouldn't you want to be in a virtual reality playground? and so there was a gap there. And so that sort of set my research career in motion with a focus on how to represent meaning within these systems. And one of the ways that work culminated most recently was in this book, Phantasmal Media. This is a book that's focused on how cultural worldview is built into computational systems. And so, in a way, my focus isn't strictly on narrative anymore. That's sort of one sort of artistic mode or one mode of communication or thought, but rather it's a type of imaginative thinking that underlies the ability to tell stories. So again, that's metaphor, analogy, blending of different concepts, generating new ideas. And so it's this cognitive substrate, you could say, that's below narrative. And so what the book focuses on then is an approach to analyzing and designing computational media systems that evoke what I've called phantasms. These are blends of cultural ideas and sensory imagery, and I'll give you a few examples in a moment. The sort of activist side of it is that my focus is on revealing oppressive phantasms and constructing empowering ones. And so again, this term empowerment comes in. That's not a typical sort of term that's used within engineering or AI practice, but it's foregrounded in this work. And what I mean by phantasm is a sense in which an image like this seems uncontroversial. So if I ask you, what does this image represent, then what would you say? Woman. So it's obvious in a way, although you could have said something like this is somebody wearing a kilt or somebody with a cape behind them in silhouette. There are a number of different kind of interpretations you could have had of this, but even people that don't feel that women do or should wear this type of clothes or they're exclusive to women still have that kind of immediate ability to apprehend this. And it's because of the way that cultural values are embedded within the visual representation of the system. And of course, when we begin to look at dynamic, interactive media images, the same phenomenon holds, right? It doesn't change just because we have this image, which is now dynamic, this is what we call an elastic anchor, this sort of material form a visual form that we're mapping our imagination onto as it moves, and up through more kind of complex images, such as you see in more advanced games, like Final Fantasy here. So all of our cultural worldviews and assumptions about these kind of characters still take place as you begin to interact with them. And in fact, the same values that we have when we're engaging the world through studies like this, the classic Clark study, in which African-American children were choosing between a black baby doll and white baby doll, invariably chose this baby doll and said, that one is like me. That's the baby doll, which is the good doll, the one that looks nice, etc. The same kind of cultural values are built into our systems, regardless of, say, how technically advanced they are. And furthermore, the same values that are built into these systems are often implicit and invisible to users because they're based on the back end. So this is a data structure describing the Nintendo Mii character you saw, and so the idea that is girl, right, that's just coded into the abstract data structure. And so the idea is I'm looking at the back end and the way that the actual code, the algorithms and data structures begin to embed these values. And that's what I'm calling phantasms. They're mysterious, they're invisible, but you can tease them out in a very concrete way in engineering systems. And so the aim is then to use, for me, when computational narrative for expression, to use the algorithmic and data structural characteristics of computational media to build imaginative worlds, selves, and to engender poetic thought. And so to unpack this just a little bit, is one way to look at media is to say each medium has its own unique characteristics. A lot of the time people think of the computer not as a medium, but as something like an instrument. People don't think about it as a medium in its own right. And in film, there are certain kind of characteristics of the media. So you might talk in terms of montage, cut, take, etc. But for computational media, despite the fact that it can emulate other media like video or film, I think it has some of its own characteristics, which are characteristics such as it works procedurally, it works in terms of algorithms, it represents data on the back end. And so this is building on a set of scholarship that begins to identify the characteristics of the computer as a medium or set of media in their own right. So another way to say all this, and so this is the last kind of evocative preamble before I show some systems, is that what I'm trying to do is more akin to something an author like Samuel R. Delany might do. So this is the author of works like Tales of Neverion. So he often describes himself in bios. It's like Audre Lorde. You have a list of different kind of descriptors, sort of, where he's black, gay, dyslexic, and so on. He describes himself in a number of different ways as an author, but he constructs these worlds as a form of social commentary. So you might have worlds in which you have the blonde-haired, blue-eyed barbarian boy, but you don't. But it's not strictly opposition. It's not just flipping. The power relationships. You have a liberator of a sort of nondescript ethnic identity, and so you have this kind of intertwining of different kind of cultural values in order to comment, of course, on our real everyday world. And so when you build imaginative worlds in the computer, I'm interested in doing something akin to what Delaney is doing here, but with another characteristic, which you could say get from an author like Italo Calvino. So if you haven't read If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, it constructs imaginative worlds as well, but it actually uses an algorithmic structure to do so, and a very unconventional story structure. So what I mean is when you read the book, you open it and it says, you are about to read Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. Smoke drifts over the pages, and you're in a train station, and so you become a character within the novel, but then you get to the end of the first chapter, and it describes to you that the rest of the novel is blank. And so you have to take the novel then back to the store, you get a new one, and then that one starts a new novel, and with a totally different style. And so it goes on like this with you as the reader, reading different novels, just the first chapter of different novels in every single chapter. But when Calvino constructed this, he actually did it algorithmically. So this is the procedural structure he used to sculpt the way the navigation through the novel and the structure of the novel. And so, of course, that's what you have to do when storytelling on the computer as well. And also, of course, with a hefty dose of somebody like Nina Simone. So that's just this idea that that artistic expression and affect can be combined with social engagement and real social issues and social empowerment and activism. And so the way that you can imagine this would be to say that in a story like Delaney's Tale of Gorgic, you have a character, Gorgic, who's born into a merchant class, but knows slavery, he knows the high courts, the military, revolutionary action, he knows all these different walks of life. And then finally, like in Rashomon, through all of these different experiences of worldview, he begins to see inequities within a society. So you can look at this as, again, seeing different worldviews then can reveal these kind of social phantasms. So all of that is to set the stage for the kind of, you could say, technical research and then aesthetic commitments I have with some of this kind of work. Although there's a danger in doing that, because I can't say that the work that we've created using Griot, Genie, or Chymera approaches anything like the affect of Nina Simone or the world building of Delaney, but you can see that as a kind of inspiration for the sort of thing that we're doing. And we built a number of different kind of systems, and so I'll just only be talking about 3 of them today. And finally, the thing to keep in mind is that with each of these, we build both a platform and then we build a particular work, a particular set of works. And so I'll be describing the platform to you as well as a work which is exemplary of what you can build with the system. So first of all, Griot. This was what came out of my PhD dissertation work. It's a platform for building interactive and generative multimedia narratives. And so the idea with Griot is that at its core is this algorithm for conceptual blending. So that's a way that you can take ideas from multiple areas of knowledge, blend those together, and generate new knowledge. And that can be realized as sequences of video clips, animation, or as generated text. We have an engine that can provide a narrative structure, so put these clauses or put these different video sequences or animations into a kind of narrative structure, and then an analogy finding algorithm that can help. So you have one clip, you want to find another one that relates to it in a particular way, and we use this algorithm to find subsequent clips. And so I won't go too much into the detail of the architecture, but if you're interested, you can ask me about it afterwards. But I'll just focus on this point here, which is that after having some kind of output, you have user input that sets the loop in motion, where you have new content that's then generated by the system. So it's not just interactive, it's generative, based upon the kind of input that users are giving. And so I'll make it concrete with an example of what we've created with this that deals with issues of war, truth, and reconciliation. And so one of the projects created with Griot was called the Living Liberia Fabric. This was an interactive narrative peace memorial that was initiated in affiliation with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia. And so this was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission after 14 years of civil war in Liberia. I began this project with colleagues in international affairs. They were doing all the IT work for the information minister of Liberia, so that was a step away from Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the president and Nobel Prize winner there. And this was modeled after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Liberia, a very famous one after the fall of apartheid. And the difference here was that in Liberia, you have a number of different ethno-linguistic groups. You have these 15 different ethno-linguistic groups that exist there, and it's very difficult to trace the root of blame here. And so what we built was this kind of interactive narrative fabric to bring out some of the context of the history and tell it from the point of view of different stakeholders and engage different themes. And I think I should give you just a little bit of background about the conflict, just so you can have some information as you begin to look at it. So many of you might know that Liberia it's a West African country that was never formally colonized. But I say formally because in 1847, freeborn African Americans, as well as Africans from other regions, they eventually became the Congo because a lot of them came from Congo region, were relocated. They're on ships, relocated to Liberia in collusion with the American Colonization Society, which is a sort of pro-slaveholding society. And that motion, where this group becomes the elite class, right, they're sort of diaspora Africans in another part of Africa, become this sort of social elite and sets into motion a series of conflicts that culminates in civil war between 89 and 2000. 250,000 people died, 250,000 displaced. And so one of the things that we did was to say memorialization is a key way to avoid recidivism back to war. Research in transitional studies shows this. And so we decided, rather than just create a repository of clips, to create an interactive narrative memorial. And so this work came out of meeting with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner, Peace Museum experts, a lot of field work, a semester of work of just talking to people and doing field work before even beginning to build the system. So typical human-computer interaction processes, user analysis, scenario-based design, and so forth. And finally, from all of that, we ended up being able to annotate each of the clips with information on 3 different levels. So the visual level, say it doesn't have a lot of saturation and color. Diagrammatic level, how do these different pieces begin to work together? Can they be the middle of the story? Can they be the end of the story, and so forth? But most importantly, a conceptual level, which means that does a clip have to do with a certain stakeholder group? Does it have certain themes like activism or empowerment, and so forth? From there, we map that into some form, which is sort of amenable to our system, and then we can, by analogy, find subsequent clips. So what I'll do now is just show a bit of the system functioning. And I should say that this is a bit of an artificial setting to show the work in, because it's actually designed for diaspora Liberians and people in Liberia itself, and it deals with a lot of issues of atrocity and so forth. So showing as a tech demo always takes something away from sort of the gravity of the work, but I did want to at least share it with you today. Yeah. So we begin, remember one of the 1490 victims from my country, or 12,000 victims from yours. And we're choosing right now an initial stakeholder group. So I'll stop it just to explain what's happening. You could choose something like woman, but the system's choosing the other dimensions. So that could mean combatant, survivor, et cetera. So we're choosing just one dimension of the stakeholder group. And from there, it's going to bring up a set of potential clips that are embedded in a frame. This is like a batik fabric. There's also a kind of fabric called lapa fabric that people actually will sew different photographs and such during political events into it.
And I'm recommending that we please have in Liberia TB and leprosy center all over in the Republic of Liberia. That is, one, we should have the testers at the various hospitals and clinics, because in Liberia, at the early stage, you will never know that you are leper or you're a TB patient. But once you go at a hospital, while doing your polio test, you do your AIDS test, you do your TB test, and you do your leprosy test. It will prevent the various diseases from killing our people.
So after selecting that clip, that was one that was actually taken in the field with a van that was driving around with a kiosk in the back so people could tell this one. Yeah, so these are all potential clips, so you can click on one of these and
Earlier, I
it
talked
has a
about
relationship
being
there.
angry. That first part of my life was angry with the perpetrators, which meant these ex-child soldiers. When I started working with them, I realized that these young people are as much victim as I am.
I want to send a greeting up to TRC.
And so we had first the connection, the stakeholder group from women to begin talking about the young child soldier perpetrators, and so we begin to have youths here, and it goes on. So the role of the AI in the system is actually to tell stories different ways each time, but to maintain coherence despite the fact you can tell the story differently every time you run the system. I guess we can end with it.
I saw this moment, behold, one precious feeling, and I see my soul, my Savior God, to thee, how great thou art, how great thou art.
Right, and so I can't play an entire run through, but there is a kind of narrative trajectory that goes from providing some context-setting information, finding other settings by analogy, and moving forward towards peace and future-related kind of initiatives and ideas there. So there's always a certain narrative arc. And to give you a sense of the text that's generated, these are just two segments of different kind of text that can be generated by one run-through. So for example, here, our lost mother reflecting, not a story, a human. The first Americo-Liberians acquired land with arms. There were positive stories of survival. Margibi, 3,394 victims. That woman forgetting there. River Cess, 2,315 victims. What can we do in the future? And it goes on from here to finally the peace-related ideas in the future. We can love again, we look toward ourselves, possibility. And so this is a computer-generated text that adds coherence, and so the idea to the experience. So the idea was to have a kind of poetic text that gives an arc into the overall narrative. And again, so that's just to give you a sense of the kind of aims we had with Griot, was to enable this sort of interactive narrative experience that's much different than the kind of holy grail of a virtual reality type experience. So after Griot, one of the systems I built using an NEH grant, National Endowment for the Humanities, Digital Humanities startup grant, was called the Genie platform. So this is a gestural narrative interaction engine. And the idea is that we began to think about gesture and body language as a primary way that we convey our identities and tell our stories. And so the idea with this system is that we know that humans are great at expressive, nonverbal communication. So this kid saying, I've seen this problem a million times before, rolling his eyes at it. We have already expressive system gestural communications. So for example, icons bouncing up to get our attention, and so forth. Right. We have gestural interactions such as pinching out to zoom out, which is a very instrumental form of interaction, just navigating an interface. But what I think is missing in this picture is expressive human-computer gestural interaction. So imagine a story that you can navigate, entirely by the attitude of your character in terms of gestural postures you go through the story, as opposed to other kind of interaction like controller-based combat and so forth. Right. So you could think about this as a puppeteerly narrative. You have a character that is then, say, nodding or becoming more closed or more open, depending on how you're performing gestures. And so the Genie platform is one for building gesture-based interactive narratives for touchscreen devices. Again, it has a model of a narrative structure built into it. This is based on social linguistics, models of narrative of personal experience for those who are interested. We modeled cinematic convention within it, certain cinematic conventions about shot selection. We enable gestures to drive the story forward. And it demonstrates a type of expressive nonverbal interaction. So I'll show you what this looks like. This isn't a full story. This is a demo of the way that you interact with the system. which is called Rain Bus Ecstatic. And so you have two characters that are on a bus. He's saying, do you like my hat? We have different objects on the stage. The characters are actors on the stage. So we have bundles of emotions called sentiments that are represented, internal feelings and externally displayed feelings. Right, so right now we're showing what the characters are feeling at different times. We have an event structure, so at any time you can interact and cause an event to happen, but you can also seamlessly have time pass if you don't interact. So we're using a close-up to go into the psychological space. So now she's thinking about things she saw on the stage, changing what she thinks about the thing that she saw. Right, and so after you change what she thinks about this, then he's asking, what do you think about my hat? And you don't even want to know. So her internal sentiment towards the hat has changed. Right. So that's just to give you a sense of sort of the kind of narratives you can begin to build using the system. And I'll tell you about one particular narrative that we built, which is a game called Mimesis that we developed using Genie. And this one addresses a different kind of phantasm. These are phantasms of covert discrimination, of empowerment, and identity. And so you can describe this as a game that models racial microaggression. So everyday covert acts of discrimination, such as micro-assaults, name-calling, micro-insults, a type of rudeness, not serving somebody in a restaurant, micro-invalidations, communications that exclude, negate, or nullify the experiential reality of other people. That's the sort of comment that we always hire based on merit here in the face of overt kind of discrimination. So these are just examples of kinds of microaggression. And so researchers have broken these into families. Of course, this is based on the work of Danny Solorzano down at UCLA and developed further by a number of researchers. This is by Sue and others at Columbia. But the idea is that there are certain themes, like alien in one's own land. So being told constantly, you speak English so well, this sort of thing, that gives this message that you are a foreigner. That asking somebody of a certain descent to solve a math problem for you because you assume that they should be good at it, right? When I look at you, I don't see color. This sort of thing that actually denies the existence of the experience of racism. So there are all these families of microaggression. And what we did was build a fantastic scenario. So remember the reason I mentioned Delaney and building fantasy to comment on these issues, in which you have families of sea creatures. Each one represents one of these types of microaggression. You play as a mimic octopus. It's a kind of octopus that can imitate other types of creature. And in the clinical psychology research on microaggression, besides being oblivious, there are three ways that people typically respond to it. Being confused. Did something discriminatory actually just happen when I was asked to move to the back of the bus there? Being suspicious. I don't like what just happened, but what do I do about it? Or being aggressive in response, verbally striking back, which often also is not satisfactory. And so what you can do through gesture is take on any of these different stances in addressing microaggression in the game. And so you have these emotion-driven gestures that drive that select the dialogue. The responses depend on the mood that you're in based on these gestures. And then the idea is just to experience a bit of what the structure of microaggression is like through the narrative. And so it's a lot different than there are other projects, such as the implicit association test or Project Implicit that you may know of at Harvard, which you take a test and at the end of it, it says, you're not biased, or it says, you are biased. It's a quite different kind of experience to say, it's not a matter of pointing the finger, but to say, let's immerse you in the experience of the structure of what this is like. And also the fact that you're encountering multiple creatures, like in Rashomon, you have multiple experiences that you can contrast to one another. And there are different conclusions of it. So you might have one, depending on your trajectory, that is a assimilationist or accommodationist kind of conclusion, or an activist conclusion. And the endings are determined based on first, we test to see if you're aware of microaggression before the experience. Single encounters, are you open or closed, or negative or positive? And then the trajectory across all of the experiences. So we built a touchscreen version. Actually, I'll show you what the online version, the Flash-based version, looks like. And it's on our website, so I could just give you the URL if you're interested in later. You can play it yourself. But first, we just give a scenario to test to see if people are aware of it. You have this jellyfish talking to your character, which is the octopus. So, yes, what is it? Well, you're a genius, right? Put that big brain of yours to work. Help me open the scallop. I'm starving. Well, just because I'm a cephalopod, that doesn't make me a genius. Figure it out yourself. Okay, bye. Thanks for nothing. All right, so we had the scenario play out, and you could say, who was more aggressive there? So right now we're just trying to get at if people have a sense of what was going on in that scenario, describe it, give 1 or 3 words, and so forth. We also actually at one point had built an add-on where you could use your musical taste from Facebook to set your initial mood. So if you listen to angry music, and then you had angry mood. It's not in the current system, but we actually did implement this. Right, so we wanted to give a greater connection to from your real self to the system. Actually, we put that in the next system that'll show you. So here are just a couple of scenarios here. So let's say this is the jellyfish, right? So it's assuming that you're skillful. Your tentacles are so elegant. As you swim, you must be good at stinging at prey, right? Being more open. All right, well, it's assuming I'm skillful just because of how I look. Right. Well, these are, so you're being aggressive in your response. These are tentacles without stingers. I'm an octopus. Sorry, we don't get many of your kind around here. So how do you sting then? So now we're being more positive. And so you're thinking obliviously. And so being both open and positive means you're oblivious. I don't sting my prey. I catch it by sneaking up on it. You just explain. Oh, so you use your strange tentacles in an interesting way. They're so elegant. All right, you don't like that. I don't need its approval to know that I'm skillful. Right. So you respond aggressively. Again, right. So it's like, okay, I better let you get on then. Right, and so we have different creatures that represent different families. The shark is assuming you're a criminal, like you're up to no good. This sort of thing, and so forth. Just try to stay out of trouble. Wait, what? Is it dangerous around here? Right, and so forth. I guess the final one in this demo is the seahorse that assumes you're a stranger even though you're finally in your own tidal region. Sorry, we don't see many octopuses around here. Okay, it's pretty ignorant. I lived here my entire life. You act like you don't realize that. And then finally, we give this kind of a poetic ending, which actually doesn't tell you the best. It's not that you win or lose. It's actually a reflection on the trajectory of experiences that you've had. And so this is what the kind of ending looks like. You return home to your home among the fronds and the sunlight. You feel slightly altered, as though your skin has changed shape and you have not adapted to fit it. When you don't mimic other creatures, you know that there are probably biting remarks everywhere, sometimes having to mimic in order to get along wears down on you. You are still not sure how often to mimic other species, but you know you won't have to do it as much now that you're home. You came out of every encounter with a sense of camaraderie as you're able to fit in. So you have a kind of accommodationist twist here. And of course we do user testing and so forth to look at the potential for conceptual change, et cetera, over the course of the experience. And did you have a question? No, okay. And so I'll conclude with this last system, which is called Chymera. And so this is the most recent platform that we built. And again, Mimesis, you could reskin that. You could put in not just fantastic creatures. You could use photographs from everyday life. You could, it's just an XML file, so you can easily rewrite the dialogue. It doesn't take coding to change one of the stories because we have the system that can do all the work on the back end for you. And so Chymera is a system, now we're thinking about how your identity categories begin to change and shift over time. And so what the Chymera platform does is offer support for what we're calling category gradients and category dynamics. So what does that mean? Well, let me give you an example. So imagine if you're playing a video game and you like to play a fighter, kind of knight type character. But then you begin to dabble a bit in magic, and so you're kind of a hybrid between the fighter and magic user. You don't like magic, you go back to being a knight. And so gradients would be this case where you're moving away from what's a central representative of being a fighter. You're moving more towards the margins because you're combining elements from different kind of categories. And then finally, you decide to go what they call full mage within this. All right, so you're all magic. But you could also imagine something similar. As you're listening to Pandora or Spotify, you're listening to all punk rock music, dabble a bit in jazz, go back to punk rock music, and finally go full jazz, as they say. So the idea is that you have this dynamics of your category that's the same pattern across both of these stories. And and the mathematical model of these kind of shifts, moving between the center and the margins of category, being members of multiple categories, and the way that that trajectory looks over time is what our system mathematically models for you. So it's a platform. You can tie into external systems like YouTube, Facebook, All-Music Guide, a lot of other systems using it, or build your own content. We have an interface for building stories within it, so this is even easier than with Mimesis. You can go in and add your own rules and narratives and media to build your own stories using the system. And I'll give you just an example of one story built using the system to illustrate it. And so in this one, you could have any number of categories, but in this one, we're using two categories that are oppositional. You could think of them as sort of elves and hobbits, but we're calling them sylvans and brushwoods. You have these sylvans that love poetry and fine clothes and so forth, and these brushwoods that love sort of hardy earth tales and sitting around the fire and really earthy fabrics and so forth. Again, you could have any kind of representation on the surface. The visuals could be different. So I'm talking about the underlying model. So whatever is relevant to you, you can change the surface representation, which is the theme here that I'm focused on, the underlying data and algorithm here. And so what the system does, there are a few things. It separates abstract categories and concrete categories. So what I mean is you can have a structure in which you have, say, a privileged category and a discredited or stigmatized category. That's the abstract social structure, but then that could be instantiated with any other kind of group. So you could say that I'm running it now, and the brushwoods are the privileged or the accepted. You can run it again and say, well, now those are going to be the stigmatized. So you can imagine a game in which you set for one city, you have one social structure. For another city, you have a different social structure, or different characters within themselves have different ways of looking at society and looking at you. And so each of these concrete categories has features like what clan are you a part of, what's your gender. We have some ranged features like your height, your speaking ability, and so forth. And so when you look at group membership, you would look at something like this. If you're not just a Sylvan because you clicked a button and you're Sylvan. Actually, you could say you're a stereotypical or prototypical Sylvan. If you are both a Sylvan, you're tall, have fine clothing, and speak well according to the standards of that world. And similarly, you could have a prototypical brushwood. That means not all brushwoods are the same. Not all brushwoods or sylvans have these characteristics within our model. And so the idea of category gradients then is that you could also have, for example, the well-dressed, eloquent brushwood within the system, right? You're not fixed just because you happen to be a brushwood. And also these can change over time. And so, so you can imagine playing as a character in which you're this prototypical or kind of stereotyped brushwood. And over time, you begin to change. You sit up a little bit taller. You change the way that you talk. You essentially try to pass as a Sylvan. And at some point, you may or may not be able to pass some threshold through which you're accepted. That would mean that you've passed as a member of this other group. At the same time, you could also imagine something where so that's you're intentionally passing, but you could also have just sort of lucked your way into it. You could have gone back and forth and inadvertently passed, right? Or you could have slipped and maybe tried to pass but failed when you try to do these sort of things. And actually what we begin to model using this is work coming from a venerable sociologist, Irving Goffman, this idea of impression management. So doing things such as adapting prestige symbols in order to see, like a certain type of car to seem like a member of a certain group, like putting on glasses to seem like you're literate, and so forth. And so we actually begin to model these sort of social phenomena in which you're beginning to say to intentionally pass, inadvertently pass, and so forth, or partially pass, only tell certain people about certain parts of your identity, and so forth. And so what I'll do is I'll run a demo of the system and then describe to you a little bit about how this is functioning. So the Sylvan and Brushwood have been at war for ages. So this is one demo we made for a games conference. So it's a sort of a typical game scenario. You're trying to get into a castle, and there's a guard there. And so the idea is just to illustrate what the system can do using a very simple scenario. So the Sylvan and brushwood have been at war for ages. The Sylvan, known as the tall people on average, are sometimes judged from afar to be lovers of finery and elaborate poetry. The brushwood are small people judged to be fond of earthy homespun fabrics and good hearth tales. You are a Sylvan, so remember that. You're part of the Sylvan elf-like group. You stand before the gate of a keep. You need to enter. The need is dire. You are tall, wearing fine clothing and articulate. You see a brushwood guard wearing sturdy armor. He looks preoccupied. So what do? Do you dust off your boots, adjust your clothes in a gilded mirror, untuck your tunic, or hide your fine jewelry? So what do you do? All right, so you hide your jewelry, and he likes that. So, and you think to yourself, I'm trying to fit in with these brushwood. The guard before you looks curious. So do you speak to him in your own language, my governor, which is a Sylvan greeting that's actually Elvish, with using an Elvish translator online. Hello, greetings, brother, or good day, brushwood. So what do you say? All right. He likes this. You're trying to fit in. He looks curious. All right. In your own language again. Some weather we're having today. Good day. Or I hope you are faring well. A star shines upon the hour of our meeting. Okay, some weather we're having. He likes that too. He's a little bit wary still. We don't see many new folk around here. Did you travel far to get here? It seems like he's about to say we don't see many of your type, or we don't see many Sylvan around here. Do you say 'tis not far from home? Oh yes, good man, is a strange land to me. New, I'm from just around the way. Or I'm from a little ways off indeed. All right, you're from around the way. You're trying to fit in. Okay, well, not surprisingly, welcome. I think you'll be at home here. And so you think to yourself, okay, thankfully I was able to convince him to let me in. So that's one run through of the system. But with the same selection, you could also have gotten at the end, all right, well, I got in, but I had to try to pretend to be something I'm not in order to get in. So we have different levels of success or failure. You can get in or not, but also you have your own internal thoughts. And just to give you a sense of this, so we describe in the clause structure of the story. And we're beginning to adjust your acceptance rating according to clothing. We have different tests and so forth as you go on. And so I'll just go through finally where we're not getting in. Yeah, he didn't like that. It's a strange land to me. And you're being yourself, speaking in your own language. All right, you didn't get in. It seemed like once he realized I'm Sylvan, he's never going to let me in. So you got sort of stereotypical endings this time. But again, so this is a selection of the kind of endings. And so what happens is that you could have gotten an ending where actually you acted like yourself, and then you see that the bottom out of the ones are greenish at the top. The guard let me in, but seemed more dazzled by my race than anything. That means you could have been yourself and been seen as a token or exoticized in some way. What's actually what Goffman calls stigma allure, and let in. Yeah. So the idea is we have these different descriptions, themes that are evoked. You could have a theme of acceptance. Thankfully, you were able to convince him to let you in, or a theme of denial of self. I had to pretend to be something I'm not. Yeah, so that's just a sense of the range of different kind of outcomes that are enabled by the system. We built another system that's all about actually a music social network where you talk with other virtual characters about your musical taste, brings up YouTube clips. You can say whether you like them and not and so forth. That one's on our website. You can play with it too. You can also take your Facebook information and use that to decide what your musical taste is at the beginning. And it contrasts two different musical categories that are seen as oppositions, like, say, pop rock and holiday music or something like this. And so that's just to give you a sense of what the Chymera system does. I want to conclude just by reminding you what we looked at. So the Griot system, which focused on dynamic themes and stakeholder groups that were generated on the fly. Genie, that's dynamic gestural interaction. And finally, Chymera, that's dynamic identity categories. And so you could think about it this way, is that each of the interactive narrative systems that we've shown is a step toward addressing cultural worldview via computing. That my early interest in interactive narrative began as a bridge between AI and social issues in digital media, But actually, I now really believe that attending to how cultural worldview is implemented computationally is key to developing powerful and new forms of expressive and empowering digital media systems. So, thank you.
Mm-hmm.